Grace and peace to you from God, our Creator, Jesus, our Redeemer, and the Holy Spirit who sustains us. Amen. As I mentioned briefly, we are doing a Lenten sermon series about wilderness. Pastor Daniel and myself. And for 6 weeks, we're going to be talking about the wilderness and what it means to be in the wilderness, what it's like to be in the wilderness, and what you need to survive the wilderness. And so every Sunday, there's a different survival element. You can see the little circles here. Today, we're on shelter. Next week, we'll be on fire, and so on and so forth. So we're talking about shelter in the wilderness today, and we think this comes at a perfect time in our church season and in the life of our congregation and our church. So when you think about wilderness, we talked in the children's message about shelter and how it helps to help us feel safe and secure and comforted and like a place to have our stuff, right? And to know where we're supposed to lay our heads at night. We wanted to start this sermon series with shelter first, because when you're in the wilderness, shelter comes first. Oftentimes, you drive up your car to your campsite and you immediately start getting out all your stuff and you set up your tent first, right? The first thing that I do, at least, is I set up the tent. I blow up the sleeping pad or the air mattress, roll out the sleeping bag. If you really want to get fancy, you can hang some twinkle lights, make it feel get the ambiance going, right? The ambiance. And you can really just get set up, right? Shelter first. And then, and only then, is when I can relax. When I have the tent up, I have everything out. I know that if it rains, I'm going to be okay. And I can put my feet up around a fire at that point of being in the wilderness. Well, also we know in the hierarchy of needs that physiological needs and needs for safety are at the bottom of the pyramid. They are foundational, they're most important, and shelter fits in both of those areas of our needs as human beings. And we also know with the homeless population and people experiencing homelessness, there's this great model of shelter first for helping to overcome the epidemic of homelessness or addiction or whatever it may be that people struggle with. Without a home, they're not going to be able to overcome those struggles. Because without a place to lay our heads at night, we can't do all of those other things. Without a physical address, you can't get all the documents that you need to go to the DMV or to do all of those things, right? So shelter first is becoming a very popular, very successful model for people who are experiencing homelessness or addiction or whatever is going on when people struggle. And so shelter first is where we're going to start today. And we know a few things about shelter. We've talked about this a little bit. We know it provides protection, whether it be from animals or insects or rain or winds or the beating down of the sun. Shelter provides protection from all of those things for us. It can provide warmth, especially if you have a fire close by or a warm, cozy sleeping bag. It can provide warmth and a coziness about it. It can bring a sense of home away from home. And we know that in the wilderness, shelter is temporary. It's not meant to be forever. It's meant to be a place for us to stay while we explore something new. Right? When we're camping, we're out searching for that sense of freedom or adventure or an exploration or growth in the wilderness. And it's a place for us to stay in that discomfort, in that newness, in that excitement. We still need a place to rest and to lay our heads and to feel that security in the midst of that adventure. And so shelter provides that for us. It's temporary. I mean, think of the native peoples and teepees, right? These shelters are ingenious because they're temporary. You can just take the skin off of the outside and you can bring the poles with you, or you can get new poles at the next location. I know in backpacking, there's a trend right now where you try to go extremely lightweight with your backpacking gear. It's very pricey to do that, but it shows that it's temporary and you can just bring it with you, as much gear as you want, because it's all super lightweight. Shelter helps us to solve the problem of being exposed. Whether it's a physical level, right, of being exposed to the elements, of being exposed to physical danger, whether it be a bear or another human or insects, whatever it may be, it helps us with that problem of being exposed. But also in the wilderness, We can be exposed in an emotional level, right? Or in a vulnerability of discomfort, being exposed to newness, to uncertainty, being exposed to risk, being exposed to change. All of these things are things that we are exposed to in the wilderness, in the sense of both freedom and excitement, and also uncertainty and unknown. We hear a lot about this exposure in the story of Exodus, the story of the Passover, the story of the Israelite people. They are exposed in the wilderness for 40 years after this Passover story that we read this morning. The story of Passover, maybe you know the Israelite people, they were enslaved in Egypt. For over 400 years, they were enslaved in Egypt by Pharaoh. It was a really harsh time for them. They were oppressed and enslaved. And we know the story of Moses floating down the river, right? But that story is because the Egyptians killed all of the firstborn sons of the Israelites, and Moses' mom wanted to save him, so she put him in a basket in a river. Little did they know that he would be plucked out of the river. His name literally means drawn from the water. I love that. Moses would be plucked out of the river and risen up as a leader for the Israelite people to hopefully save them from enslavement one day. And before our story today kicks off, we have the story of Moses and God going to Pharaoh time and time again and asking him, please let my people go. Free the Israelite people, Pharaoh. And time again, Pharaoh refuses. And they send plague after plague to try to get Pharaoh to relent his oppressive reign. And nothing. It even says that his heart was hardened. And then the final plague comes. And the final plague was the killing of all the Egyptians' firstborn sons. And so we get this story of Passover. And in order to save their own firstborns, the Israelite people, they make a sacrifice of a lamb and they spread the blood on their doorposts so that this plague would pass over their homes. But the part of the story that really stood out to me today is while they're eating this lamb, they are told to have their loins girded, sandals on their feet, and their staff in their hand, and eat hurriedly. So they are eating so fast, ready to get out the door and escape. Imagine that for a second. They're totally ready to go. They've got their backpacking packs on. They have all their belongings together. They've got their walking sticks, so they're only eating with one hand, eating hurriedly, ready to escape into the wilderness. And that's exactly what they do. The plague passes over their homes, and they escape into the wilderness for 40 years together. They go through the Red Sea. They get away from Pharaoh's army. And then in the wilderness, what do? They start complaining. They start whining. They start saying, Moses, Aaron, we're hungry. Come on. Have you brought us here to die? There's no food here. What are we doing here? There's no water. I'm thirsty. They start groaning. They start grumbling. They say, we want to go back. Can you imagine? In the wilderness, they want to go back. They want to go back to Egypt where they were enslaved and oppressed, all because they're experiencing a little bit of discomfort, a little bit of hunger, a little bit of worry, a little bit of uncertainty. At least in Egypt, they know exactly what they were getting. They want to go back. I think this is so relatable. When we experience that freedom, that excitement, but also when we experience the uncertainty that comes with that, we get a little worried. We start to idealize the past, even if the past wasn't so great. We weren't happy there either, right? But of course, the grass is always greener. And so they idealize what it was like to be in Egypt, to be enslaved, and they want to go back. When I was thinking about this story, I was thinking about a back to Egypt moment that I had in the wilderness, and I got this great opportunity to go to Grand Canyon National Park and raft the Colorado River. And I only got to go because somebody backed out of the trip last minute and they needed somebody. And I was in between my internship year and trying to come back to North Carolina and become a pastor. And so I got to go on this once-in-a-lifetime experience of rafting down the Colorado River. And I was so excited, and it was something I would never be able to do on my own. And when I got there, we were rafting, and it was beautiful, and I was really getting along with all the people that were traveling with us. And the first night, we set up camp, and it was great, and the raft guides cook for you, and you feel so spoiled, and it's wonderful. As soon as the sun started to go down, these bugs came out of nowhere. They were called tamarisk beetles, and they were just swarming us, and they were so oppressive, and they were all over, and they were everywhere. One person I was rafting with got one stuck in her ear, and my uncle, who's a veterinarian, he had to pluck it out of the inside of her ear, and it was so traumatic, and it was horrible, and we couldn't even sit around a fire and socialize. We had to immediately put up our tents and get in, and we had to make sure our headlamps weren't too bright because they would all swarm to your face. But of course, we're in Arizona, floating down a river, so all day they're saying, drink lots of water, make sure you stay hydrated. You see where this is going? In the middle of the night, you have to use the bathroom. So you got to go out of the tent, and you got to turn your light on so you don't trip and fall on a scorpion or something, right? And as soon as you turn your light on, the bugs all come. They were all inside my clothing and everything, and then, when you try to barely zip the tent so you can dive through the hole and zip it back up quickly, right? So the bugs don't get inside. Well, of course, that didn't work. And they follow you into the tent. And now you have bugs all in your tent. It was horrible. And of course, these bugs, they're an invasive species because they introduced this invasive tree called the tamarisk tree. And it has, its roots make the soil really salty so nothing else can grow around it. And then they're like, oh, I know what we can do. We can introduce bugs that will eat that tree. And then, of course, the bugs grew like crazy. And this vicious cycle, right? And I was thinking, I want to go back. How on earth am I going to do this for 10 days? This is miserable. We can't even socialize at night. It's like 8 o'clock at night and I'm huddled up in my tent, just smashing bugs on the tent wall. These things bite too. How am I going to do this for 10 days? And then we get to camp the next night, and we all timidly set up our tents, and we wait for the sun to set. And there's no bugs. There's no bugs. It was just at that one spot that first night. The rest of the trip was stunningly beautiful and amazing. And we got to sleep on cots outside in 60-degree weather. It was perfect. And you could see the Milky Way without any light pollution or interference. And not only that, but that week, there was a meteor shower. So I saw the most shooting stars I've ever seen in my life. And not only that, but the stars, they were framed by the Grand Canyon, like a picture frame for the Milky Way. And for all of these shooting stars, it was incredible, amazing. And to think I wanted to go back the night before. And every night after that, God showed up in the stars in a miraculous and beautiful way. Stunning. To remind me of God's presence right there. Well, the Israelites, when they wanted to go back to Egypt, when they grumbled about being hungry and thirsty, the rest of the story is that God provided for them. Quail and manna and water in the wilderness. Right where they were, God provided for them. Quail at night, manna in the dew in the morning, and Moses hit a rock with his staff and water came squirting out. There was abundance for them right where they were. God showed up right where they were in the wilderness. And then we hear the story that Paul read about God asking them to build a sanctuary, a tabernacle in the wilderness. A tent. The word tabernacle in Latin means tent. It comes from the Latin root for tent. So they were given this task to create a tent, a space for God right where they were, because God was with them all along. And it was a movable tent. They could take it with them wherever they went. and have this place to worship, this place to make space for God in their midst, this place to notice who God is and how God has shown up and delivered them time and time again in the wildernesses of their lives, in the wildernesses of their story. God went with them as they went. And so here we are in the wilderness. We are here this Lent, in the wilderness of this church season, where we journey with Jesus to the cross, where we do introspection, where we think to ourselves, hey, maybe I'm not perfect. Maybe I need God, right? That's what Ash Wednesday is all about. Our need for God, our mortality, how we fall short. That's what this season is. We are here in that wilderness of self-examination and growth. We're in a wilderness in the church too. In the larger church is becoming more and more irrelevant. Mainline denominations are shrinking and shrinking. More and more people are becoming non-religious. How do we stay relevant in this world as the church? People's attention spans are shorter and shorter. How do we reflect God's love into that? And then in our church, we're in a time of transition. Pastoral transition. Searching for newness, a little bit of a wilderness of excitement and opportunity and freedom, and also uncertainty and change and discomfort. Holding those things together in tension. We're here. That's where we are. And we want to name that for you all this Lent. We want to talk about the things that we need to survive this, the things that we need to thrive in the midst of this. We know that we're here. And we know that wilderness is temporary. Wilderness is temporary. It's somewhere where we learn and we grow and we find God. And then we go home. We get to go to our comfortable places. But we're here for now in this wilderness. And our invitation to you all is to know that yes, it's temporary, but also let's make space for God here. Let's look for where God is showing up. Let's set up camp here for a while. Let's live into this discomfort. Let's live into this uncertainty. Let's lean on one another in all of this. Let's set up camp. Let's make sanctuaries for God to be in our midst here. Because God is here, helping us to grow and to change in the midst of it all. Amen.